Welcome to the live Q&A for the Stones of Venice virtual tour, where you, taker of the tour, new Venetian student, can ask your tour guide anything and everything about Venice. I will put the camera down right next to the Bellini. You're a Bellini. Ooh. Whoa. Hang on a minute. Looks kind of like a baby. No, there we go. And we can begin.
Hello.
Welcome.
Hello.
You guys can hear me, right?
Yeah.
Turn that down. We have new cavaliers, old and new, among us today.
Yeah.
I haven't seen McKinley and Sarah for years. I hope we are both going exceptionally well. I'm going to blur my background. Choose background effect. Blur, please.
Did other people on the call also do the New Cavalier Reading Society?
Yeah, so Katie's new member. I think she's 1 month in.
Yeah.
And McKinley did the first semester, the first one ever, 2017. The connection might be slower than usual because Italian Wi-Fi is Italian. We're gonna move the camera like that. Hang on. I don't know how to move the camera properly. I'm recording the tutorial on video for people who couldn't make it. That should work. See how we go. But yes, everybody's taking the tour, half of it at least.
Done some. I've probably done a quarter of it.
A quarter.
Sorry.
Half of that's all right.
Quarter.
It's good that you have questions
But
even through the.
How long will it be available to?
Another probably 3 weeks,
Okay.
if not 3.5. Plenty of time.
Yeah. I didn't get to go to Venice. I was in Italy last fall.
Yeah.
And I had planned to go, and it was right when they were having those massive floods. So I
Yeah.
another place.
Never made it.
I haven't gotten to be there, so it's great to get to go virtually.
And it's good. It's the best time possible, as in terms of no people at all. It's ridiculous.
None. Zero.
Yeah. Very surreal. And Matt Muaz, are you there? Are you with us?
Yes.
Excellent. Yeah, I can hear you.
Oh, great.
Easy.
Just finished it today.
Oh, you finished the whole thing?
Yeah, loved it.
And Kathleen's holed up with coronavirus, I think, or hiding from coronavirus, one or the other. Hold up.
It's been bad.
And we,
I made kicked out.
that's all right. We'll just take. It won't be as long as a reading society tutorial. Just be an hour. But yeah, I have a not a vast body of knowledge. I have a body of knowledge about Venice. So I thought I could let you guys, because if you were on the tour, you would have access to my I'd be walking with you for 6 hours, 2 mornings in a row. So we would have kind of in between what the videos are, we would have incidental discussions that would elaborate upon what the tour explores. So I thought if you guys have any questions about Venice, rather than me asking you questions like in the Reading Society, any questions you have that came up throughout the tour, I could field for you.
Yeah. I just had a question.
Yeah.
So I recently watched this very old video by John Berger from the 1970s, The Ways of Seeing, I think. It's called. So John Berger talks about, he's an art critic, so he talks about how to view art. So I was wondering, in your 4th episode, day 1, Loveliest Dream, I think, so you go through that classic green marbles, right? The pictures.
Yeah.
With the I think the dove or the phoenix and all that stuff.
Yeah.
So I was wondering whether they have so individually you covered them. So whether they have a narrative collective, like the reason why they are placed side by side.
Okay. On that specific wall, no, there's no scheme.
Okay.
It's just a matter of what fits where, probably what arrived first or what arrived second. And it could have been rearranged over the centuries as well. There could have been others that have been looted. There are, I mentioned in the tour, there are I think 1,400 patere in the world, and 483 of them are in Venice. But you walk around, even in this square just out here, there are palaces where the patere have been cut out, and so they've been stolen or looted or sold. So there is a lot that does not exist and would have been there when that southern facade was first decorated in that 13th century. But yeah, no schema on that southern facade. But remember, in episode 4, I took you through the schema of the arch vaults and the arches of the central above the central door. That's a definite scheme.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, no scheme on that.
The other thing which I found really interesting. So I recently just read the book by I don't know how to pronounce it.
Giambattista Vico. Yeah.
Yeah, and what I was surprised is the similarity between his notion and Ruskin's. I mean, Ruskin comes later, obviously. Giambattista is from 16th century, right?
Yeah.
And the way he talked about, the art and the myths and literature of a specific society can tell us about the morality and the culture of that society.
Yeah.
Really resonated with. I mean, it's very similar to what Ruskin is saying. I mean, Ruskin is much more specific. He's talking about art versus morality.
Yeah.
Giambattista was talking about social science in general. But this idea, it felt like, it's really interesting that both these authors kind of came up with the similar kind of notion.
Yeah. So
I wonder whether Ruskin was influenced by that as well.
No, so I know. Hello, Ashley Decker. Welcome. Sorry, I just got your message on the phone.
That's quite all right.
Filming and watching at the same time. Diana is in the UK, but I think her microphone is off. Maria is in South America, but is going to listen. So the question is, Ruskin's theory of the cycle and the rise and decline of civilizations, is that linked to Giambattista Vico? If anyone wants to look this guy up, it's Vico. And he is one of the originators of the idea of the cycles of cultures and civilizations. He has 4 stages in his cycles. It's a very simplified version, I think. But I've said before in the Reading Society that Ruskin and Nietzsche both independently arrived at that same theory of the rise and fall of civilizations, that they go from one phase to another, inevitably and in common. And I'm not sure, I know Nietzsche would have heard of Vico, but Ruskin would not have. They're different intellectual circles. Just going to mute Maria because she's being rowdy. There's noise in the background. But yeah, Vico is almost certainly read by Nietzsche, but not by Ruskin. Ruskin, that's a completely different intellectual tradition. Ruskin and Giambattista Vico. But Vico, I think Isaiah Berlin discusses Vico.
Yes. Yeah. So it's funny. I bought these 3 books in 3 different times from 3 different places over a 10-year period, and I started them all 2 weeks ago, and they all deal with Vico. So I bought Harold Bloom's Western Canon, which the book is structured around Vico's these 4 stages.
Yeah. Then
I bought Vico 4 years ago, last year. So I bought Vico last year just without and then Isaiah Berlin. So, and then I was picking up Vico all the way through, and then I come across Ruskin, and I was like, oh my God, I'm getting inundated with Vico in the last 2 weeks.
He sees it very early because he lives on the cusp of it. He's not. I think he comes out of Naples, I think, as an intellectual. And so he's on the cusp of this of the decline of what he sees as the decline of civilization. But Ashley, any questions about the tour? Now I'm going to go around the room like a teacher in a classroom.
Well, many of the questions that I had as I was watching, you answered. So this is
eventually.
A small one. Right.
Yeah.
But just across from the palace, there were statues across the top of the facade next to the column of St. Mark. Who's represented by those statues?
I have absolutely no idea. It is my
Okay.
it is my privilege to admit what I don't know. But
Sure.
I know that the building is the Marciana Library, and it's designed by Sansovino. It's the very, very first fully Renaissance building constructed in Venice. It's completed and finished during the War of the League of Cambrai, which is, I think, in the decline chapter of the tour, when all the nations of Europe combined, the first modern allegiance of nations, to destroy Venetian power. Even though Venice was fighting the second most desperate war of her career, she was still building and commissioning Sansovino to build that library. But I'm not sure. I'll look it up, obviously, and get back to you. But the statues atop the Marciana, I wonder, actually, I've never... Because the tour is focused primarily on the Gothic era and medieval Venice, not so much on Renaissance Venice, I do have that blind spot in my knowledge that's not yet filled in of pretty much anything after Tintoretto or anything during Tintoretto's century that isn't Tintoretto. But I shall find out for you, Ashley Decker.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. Sansovino died from eating too many cucumbers. He was a weird...
It's true.
Oh, yeah. And how about... that's all? That's the only question you had, Ashley? Oh, we're frozen. Oh, we're back? We're on Italian Wi-Fi.
It looks like, I don't know if is my microphone...
Yeah, I can hear you.
I can't tell. Okay. I just looked up the Marciana statues. A lot of them are just nudes. Nudo.
Ah, yeah, so they're not anybody famous or noteworthy.
Well, Dell'Attacco di Vittoria, Tommaso Minio, Tommaso Girolamo Lombardo. I think a lot of them are just giant nudes.
Giant nudes.
I know the giants hold up the doors.
Yeah.
The two giants holding up the doors and going in. It just says statue de nudo.
Well, that's more further proof of Ruskin's hatred of the Renaissance. Is that they no longer put individuals into their sculptures, but just nude people for funsies.
Well, so this is all from most of them.
But yeah,
they're not ancient. They're there to make it look pretty like a wedding cake.
I'll look them up, Ashley, and I'll film them for you if I can, because the sun rises on those. The sun lights them up in the early morning. So I'll film them for you and get you a closer look at who they are.
Thank you.
And worst case scenario, you see a bunch of nude men on.
And women.
Are there women up there as well? Are there?
Oh, roof statue, beautiful Renaissance era naked women at the old library.
Huh.
So,
They're all. I was planning on doing.
It's a party.
I was planning on doing a supplement where I would go into the Marciana and the Correr Museum and film them, but they're closed until the 1st of August because of coronavirus, so I'm not going to be able to before I...
No one was wearing masks.
Pardon?
No one was wearing masks.
In the tour? Or in the...
In Italy, in anywhere that you went.
So you have to wear them indoors. If you go into a church or into an art gallery, you have to wear them. Into a supermarket, you have to wear them.
Okay.
But on the streets, it's kind of 50-50. But you've got to remember, I'm out and about at 6 a.m., 5, 6, 7 a.m., so there's no one around. And I'm looking out the window now, and I can see it's 50-50, face masks, no face masks. But you also remember, Italy was the first country to go into lockdown, so they squashed it before everybody else. So it's not as prevalent here as it is, especially in America, and even in the UK. And all right, let's go around the room. Diana, are you just listening in, or are you with us in voice and in spirit? Maybe just listening in. Skype. I realize Skype is not a natural experience for most people. So, how about you, McKinley? Never made it to Italy. Halfway through day 1. Any questions thus far? So you're up to about.
I made it to Italy. I just didn't make it to Venice.
Yeah,
I
that's
was
right.
all
Sorry,
over Italy,
didn't
but
make it to Venice.
Not to Venice. I do have a question. So, did I understand correctly when you were describing the carvings that were circular? Did you say that those were like parts of columns?
Yeah. So
kind of sliced out and
They're exactly that. They're disused columns, sliced like that, to about. They're really thick. They're kind of 3 inches thick, 2 or 3 inches thick. You can actually buy them in the north of the island. I don't know if Kathleen, you've ever seen these stores. They're kind of headstone. They're like gravestone headstone stores, but they also sell. Yeah. They also sell modern patere. So you can buy those discs even now, and they're about that thick, so 2 or 3 inches. And the top half is a carved surface. The bottom half is just plain, so you can stick it on a wall. But yes, they are disused columns sliced into discs.
And there's tons of them that are modern. Modern, I would say, like 18th century, 19th century. Yeah. Because when my friend, the historian there, I'd say, oh, that was beautiful. He goes, fake. And then pointing out the real ones, because people use them for decoration. You can buy them now, so they're really beautiful. They're really beautiful.
So in the 20th century, the Fondaco dei Turchi. So one thing that doesn't get mentioned in the book in the tour, is that Venetians are so suspicious of foreigners trading in Venice that they group them according to nationality and lock them up at night time. And they put them in buildings called fondaki, and it's a word adapted from the Arabic word for hotel, which is funduk, and so they call them fondaki. Then they have the Fondaki dei Tedeschi, which is the hotel of the Germans. They have the Fondaco dei Turchi, the hotel of the Turks, and so they lock them up at night time. They're not allowed out. They're just there to work and trade.
Wow.
But the facade of the Fondaco dei Turchi, they replaced the entire thing in the 1950s and 60s. So there's not a single patere or archway on that facade that is original. They're all copies from the last 50 years. And I hate to tell you this, but it's probably better that you know the truth. The capitals from the first chapter of day 2, the capitals that Ruskin noticed were old and new on the old and new palace. They are replacements from the 1970s. They were so covered in soot and worn that they replaced them with laser cut copies and put the originals inside the Ducal Palace in the museum of the Ducal Palace. But they are exact copies. I've seen the originals. They look very, very similar. But yes, and the same with the horses of St. Mark, which I mentioned in episode 4. The originals replaced in the 70s because the air pollution was so bad. And you can go inside up into the museum of the basilica and see the original horses and touch them when nobody's looking. It's my favorite thing to do. Rub their forequarters / what are they called? Snouts. Muzzles, that's the one. That was the only question, McKinley?
That's the only question, but I just wanted to say that you have inspired me, and like this, taking the New Cavaliers Reading Society course, was it 2 years ago?
Yeah, 3.
Part of like a turning point for me, and I really love my life at this point. That was part of a new journey for me, and so traveling to France and Italy was sort of inspired by starting with these groups, and I'm now writing a novel which you will absolutely hate, but that's okay because I love it.
That's good.
Anyway.
Well, I've decided I think I've enjoyed making this one so much that I'm going to do a Siem Reap Cambodia one, which will be much shorter because the history is nowhere near as interesting or intertwined with the art, and a Bangkok one. So I'm going to do that at the end of the year. So you'll soon be traveling to Southeast Asia, McKinley, as well.
I hope that you make these available long-term for people, because I think what you've captured is extraordinary from what I've seen so far. And because of the situation we're in, there's probably nothing else like it that exists in terms of seeing all of this without the masses.
Yeah.
And Venice will change. I mean, me not being able to go because of those floods, like that's just going to continue, unfortunately. So you've captured something really important.
Yeah.
And I hope that you allow yourself to capitalize on it and continue to make it available to people.
It'll always be on the website. It's a thing that will be permanently there. Get money for it. Earn, son. I will figure out how to earn money from it, McKinley, one way or another.
good.
And thank you for that question, and thank you for your support, McKinley. Yeti, is that a Yeti cup? I like that.
Yeah, these are my favorite folks.
And
Just
Sarah.
traveled all over France and Italy with me.
Oh, nice. Teacup, right?
Pardon?
A teacup.
Oh, yeah, but oatmeal, you know, in the hospital in the morning, you put your oatmeal in it and take it with you, and 2 hours later, you still have hot oatmeal. It's great.
Sarah, did you get all the way through the 2 days?
Yes, I
Excellent.
did. I especially appreciated the drawing parts. I'm more of like a visual person, and so in the beginning, I would have liked to like draw a map on my paper or something. I was like, I got a little turned around here, but it was cool to use the drawing to understand how the Venetians traveled throughout the world, and I also appreciated the visual comparison of the hand of God, like noticing in the second part, noticing the hand of God versus
the baby faced son.
worshiping a God and then worshiping the people.
Yeah. Well, the thing with the drawing is the first kind of 3 windows that I have people look at, when people take the tour in real life, and you ask them to describe what's happened, and they can't. But the second that they have to draw the 2 lines, they realize it. And that's what one of the things that one of Ruskin's lessons is learning how to see. And once you have to reproduce something in a simplified form and a reduced form, it teaches you how to see, which is one of the bigger, larger aims of... It's blurry, Sarah. I can't... You gotta...
This is the... Oh, maybe I'll stop blurring the background.
Yeah, it's all blurry.
I don't know how to make it not blurry, but this is a toothpick holder that I had to draw.
Yeah.
And make it real. But, yeah, so I asked about 3D printing.
Yeah.
I actually Googled it, and I don't think that there's much.
No,
but
I wouldn't
did
imagine
have
there
the
is.
thought that as Venice is getting destroyed by the weather,
Yeah.
and the sea, and also for the pieces that, like that column that you pointed out that was no longer there, I think a family bought it.
Yeah, the Baiamonte Tiepolo, the column of infamy.
Is there a lot of art throughout the city that people purchased and took away?
I think Kathleen would know better than I would. Kathleen hangs out with Venetians on a regular basis.
Sadly, if you go to some place in California like Hearst Castle, and that's a very good example, but if you walk into that grand tour, during the grand tour, so many palaces all throughout Europe, not just Italy. Venice was hit especially hard because of the families being so impoverished. It had gone from being a very wealthy society to really struggling. And the noble families were trying to maintain this level of really sadly impoverished dignity in these places that are still crumbling. They kind of look the same as they did a couple hundred years ago. And so they sold off everything from ceilings to paintings to bits and pieces. I mean, they basically sold off their heritage. But they're also merchants, so they know the value of $1, and they go, well, we can buy it again one day. And while it meant a lot to them, they did get rid of a lot. A lot was plundered by Napoleon. A lot was plundered. He took things all out. Most of the things come back. A lot's in the Hermitage. Lots in England. The English got a lot out of Venice.
Yeah, the reason...
That was actually earlier. Venice, the English was more like, wasn't it? That would have been like the 1700s, 1600s. English got a lot out early.
There are more Canalettos outside of Venice than there are in Venice, because one, I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but one English art broker moved to Venice.
Pullman.
He saw the lucrative nature of this tourist trade in Canaletto and Guardi painting. So I've mentioned it very briefly, but in the 18th century, you would come to Venice, where the prostitutes were the best at their job and the stakes were the highest in the casinos, but you also had vedutisti. They're guys like Canaletto and Guardi who just paint views. Veduto is Italian for view, so they just paint views. And so you would come to Venice and you would commission one of these vedotisti to paint you a view as like an early form of a postcard. And one art broker, whose name I will get and tell to everyone, realized how lucrative this was and how skilled two of them were, specifically Canaletto and Guardi. And he made a fortune buying up as many of these paintings as he could and selling them to English Grand Tour people. So which is why there are so many Canalettos in London especially.
Well, the Queen's Palace is full.
Yeah.
All those great houses are full. But there is still an awful lot. I go into private homes and your breath is taken away when you turn a corner and you're just like beyond. And there are so many churches in Venice. I think maybe 3/4 of them aren't even open to the public.
Yeah.
I've been in a lot of those.
Yeah, Katie.
They are all full. So
Katie,
there's a lot there.
That church you asked me to look at, Katie, which I will get to, is closed to the public.
Is it?
Yeah, it used to be used for illegal abortions.
Huh?
The priest had a thing going on that
Wow.
if you came to the church and said, I can't have this child, they would perform illegal abortions.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I guess I asked the question, do you think St. Mark's is beautiful?
Yeah.
And I guess thinking about all of the art and a lot of it's gone and how St. Mark's was formed by plundering art from other places.
Mm-hmm.
It's very relevant to society today, and America, especially right now, a lot of sculptures are getting torn down from the Civil War.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Don't tell Black Lives Matter about the horses of St. Mark, because they'll tear them down and they'll destroy that whole church because it's stolen. It's war plunder.
Well, Maya Angelou said that, and I appreciated that. She said there is a point where we should preserve history so that we know the accurate story.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I guess I would agree with that.
I just realized that I said at the start of the tutorial, the Q&A, that there were no questions that I'd asked, but I just remembered there are loads of questions in the tour that I ask you constantly. Is St. Mark's beautiful being one of them? Do we think St. Mark's is beautiful when you look at it, as the facade specifically? Ashley, you're nodding your head. I can't tell if you're nodding your head.
Yeah, I found myself very drawn in, even though it's so different.
Mm-hmm.
There was something about the complicated nature of it that pulled me into just sitting with it and dwelling with it and contemplation.
Yeah.
And so in that sense, I think that there's value, whether or not you find it beautiful yourself. I think there's something to be said of art and architecture that pulls you into contemplation.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I found myself doing with St. Mark's.
But have you been to Venice, Ashley, before at all?
No, I haven't.
Do you think you would still be pulled into contemplation if you didn't know what you were looking at, if it hadn't been explained to you in such excruciating detail?
Maybe not to the same depth.
Yeah.
But I think that's part of what art, and specifically the architecture of sacred places, does. It's meant to pull your eyes inward and upward.
Uh-huh.
And I think that's, even if you don't really know what you're looking at, probably not to the same degree and with the same complexity and nuance. But I think so. I think that's part of what architecture does. For myself, that's what I found. Architecture in beautiful places, in sacred places. That C.S. Lewis quote, further up and further in. Yeah. That's what I find myself doing.
And do you think, so you're saying, hang on, so you're saying that you think it's a beautiful building not because of what it looks like, but because of its function in making you think and forcing you to reflect and bringing you in. Is that what you mean?
For me, that's why it's significant.
Yeah.
I think that just a passing glance, yes, it's beautiful, but that to me is a shallow interpretation. It's valid, but I don't think it's as much as what can be found.
Uh-huh. And Sarah, do you think it's a beautiful building? Answering the question.
Yeah, I mean, it makes me candy shop.
It does look very. It does look like it looks like a roll of. Looks like a roll of sherbet candies, all the different pastel colors.
And it's right next to the wedding cake, so you know.
Yeah.
I don't appreciate how many people had to die in the process of making it. And I don't appreciate the thought that we have to steal in order to create beautiful things, but it is a beautiful building in the way that it was created and the history of the pieces and the art styles that you're able to now learn about and reflect on.
Sorry, I'm just taking notes for my own thing.
Having been there probably about 50 times.
50 at least.
There's a certain time, I know, I'm serious. It's my favorite walk at midnight because the mosaics are lit up.
Yeah.
And there's no one, like maybe 3 o'clock in the morning, not that I do that very often, but I do, wandering home from somewhere, and you come out into the piazza, and the mosaics, those golden mosaics are on fire, and there's no one there, and you hear just the clink of the flagpole, and it's so freaky and mystical. And it does look like a candy shop, because it doesn't really look like a church.
No, it doesn't at all.
I mean, it's a square, squat blocks. It's not this lofty, high thing. But it creates this awe that transports you back 1,000 years. Like you could be anybody in that time period. And if you have the opportunity to go inside and go during like a church service, and when it's all candlelight and the scepters are going and the whole golden ceiling is all aglow. I did it with Courtney on Easter and a couple of years ago, and it was so bizarre that we were literally moved walking out. Neither one of us are very religious, and we walked out of there like this, like we needed a drink because the whole mysticism around this, and then we walked out with a whole different view.
Yeah.
And then at sunset, when the sun hits all the top of it, and the horses are on fire, and there's a prominence the way it was designed and placed that, like I said, it's not a real friendly building just in the middle of the day with a bunch of people in front of it. There's always scaffolding and there's always high water treads. But when you catch it in those moments that transport you, it's bizarre. There was very mystical. It's mystical.
1 a.m. the other night, there were a couple, very fancily dressed couple, who had decided to lie down in the middle of St. Mark's Square, facing the basilica, and they were just leaning on one another. It looked very romantic because there was no one else there. It's very, very empty.
In the dirt.
In the dirt, yeah. 10,000 tourists worth of dirt and spit and snot and yummy. Katie, questions from the tour or answers to the questions I asked that I just realized?
Well, to answer the beauty question, I think without knowing the history, I don't think I would have immediately, without being there, I wouldn't have seen as much beauty, but seeing it really is just like the history of Venice evoked in the architecture of it. And so that to me was much more beautiful. I have been there and I don't have any recollection of being there, so it didn't imprint a memory upon me. But seeing all the elements of it brings so much more beauty. And one of the things I missed while watching the tour was the feeling of being inside of these places. And there is, whether you're religious or not, there's such a feeling to places like that. Like having stood in St. Paul's in Rome and those types of things, there's just an essence to it that as you were describing things, I knew that essence was there, but you're just not going to get it as you're watching the video.
Well, I would take you inside, but the basilica it's currently closed. You can only go up into the gallery. You can't walk through. So, and it's the only place in Venice you absolutely cannot film. They watch you like they watch you like Mussolini fascists and scream at you from the other side of there. No photo.
But I think that's okay though, because you could capture the image of things, but you can't capture the feeling of it, So I think you really have to stand there in person to have that experience of the feeling. Which just means I need to go to Venice.
Definitely.
If I'm ever allowed out of my country.
If you're ever allowed out.
If that ever happens.
I will.
I'll have to upload. When I went to the Easter night service, I clandestinely had my phone on my lap, but there was a lot of standing up and sitting down. But you get the glow. I have to find it and I'll upload it to YouTube. It's pretty cool. But yeah, you can Yeah, it's
and
fun.
I think so much of it is the way light reflects off of things. So many of my memories of places are just the way that light catches certain things, and you catch them in a certain moment in day, and that is beautiful. That's what I loved about Paris, was walking around and just seeing the way the light reflected through the trees.
The light here is unparalleled. It doesn't.
Yeah.
Nowhere comes close because of the water.
Well, so all of your reflection videos have been amazing. Like, to see just short reflections of things become so beautiful. And then the only question I think I had was on the buildings where you have multiple styles of the architecture. How did that come to be? Were they replacing windows and then doing what was happening in that present time, or was it intentionally, we're going to change things? How did you come to have a building with multiple different styles?
So remember when we discussed when you saw the two early 13th century palaces, the Ca' Farsetti and the Ca' Loredan, I said the top, you have to imagine them without the top two floors, because they were able to build in stone rich enough to build in stone after the Fourth Crusade, but they weren't either technically adept or rich enough to build 4 floors up, and so they could only go to 2 floors. But when they later, through the centuries, they would add another floor or another 2 floors, or even in some areas another 3 floors. It's illegal in most areas of Venice to go above 4 floors. There would then be another style prominent that you would put the top level in. And so very few of the palaces are kind of as originally built. Like, they just did the facade and left it. There were amendments.
Yeah.
The one thing about Venice is it grows organically. And as Kathleen said, even up until now, they're still selling off their heritage. They're still selling the insides and outsides of their buildings to make a buck. So Venice is still changing, but very, very slowly. But it actually, if you look at any kind of Canaletto or Guardi painting, it looks exactly the same. Venice has changed so little since Casanova's 18th century. And you can compare the angles. I've done it a few times. You can take a picture of a view with your camera, get the exact angle right that Canaletto painted, and it looks identical, except there may be a garbage bin instead of a man in a pointed face mask, or a man in a coronavirus face mask instead of a man in a Venetian ball mask. So yeah, that's why the bottom they could only build up 2 floors high at the beginning, and the other, if it's not that, then it's just that it's a very late building, and whoever built the palace designed it to incorporate all the different styles of windows.
Okay.
And there are all throughout Venice. There are other variations. I can draw them very quickly. I can try to draw them very quickly. So you remember as a quick test, a recap, the Ducal Palace, the central arcade, is that pointed and trefoiled arch with the tracery from the Frari put in the middle. Some smart ass decides to put it not in the middle, but about. Hang on, let me try and draw this very quickly. Probably stuff it up, but 1, 2, 3, 4. No, that's not gonna work. Good work, Josh. I will take a picture and post it of the palace. It will look much better. But so what happens is, once that's codified, Venetian Gothic in 14, which year? Everybody?
23.
The most important year. 1423. When it's after it's codified in 1423, it takes 80 years, 1380 to 1423. 1340 to 1423. It becomes, I don't know the exact equivalent, but almost like the Hollywood of Venetian architecture. It becomes the source of all the other variations. So if you're a filmmaker in Bosnia, you grew up watching American films and you base your filmmaking techniques on American films. The same way, after 1423, for about 100 years, all architects, all builders, all rich people base the facades of their new palaces on variations of those pointed and trefoiled arches with the tracery from the Frari. And the most famous example is the Ca' d'Oro, the House of Gold on the Grand Canal. It takes it kind of to the next step. It's designed in the 1450s and 60s But obviously, me just talking about it makes absolutely no sense if you can't see it. But I will get a video of it, and I will take in notes so I can add to not the experience. I can add this too. But there are several variations on the one facade of the House of Gold of that Ducal Palace tracery and pattern that he Pietro Basseggio came up with. Ruskin's genius. But yeah, they kind of moved the tracery to above the arches. They put another plain Romanesque arch above the tracery. I'll send pictures and you'll be able to see all the different variations. And then even up until the 19th century, there was still... I actually realized today, does anybody remember the name? I don't expect you to remember, but the name of the architect who designed the Scuola di San Marco, the very first Renaissance building, one of the very first Renaissance buildings in Venice. His name is Mauro Codussi, Codussi. And in his new Renaissance style, he incorporates one final, it's almost like the last drunken hiccup of Venetian Gothic. The same way that Frari tracery is put between the arches. What he does, I can draw this one because it's easy, it's only round things. This is called a Codussi window. He takes plain Romanesque arches, which fit into. I feel like Matt Damon in Good Will Hunting right now. He takes plain Romanesque arches, which fit into Renaissance architecture, and he just takes a plain circle, and he puts it in the middle of two plain arches. Everyone see it? Maybe not. Can you see it? Hang on, I think I'm blurred, like Sarah was.
Yeah.
Hang on. Turn background effect. None. There we go.
Or put it next to your face.
Does that work?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's called a Codussi window, and that's the same concept, but instead of pointed and trefoiled arches and the Frari tracery, he has just plain Renaissance. He incorporates it into a few of his last buildings. So it's still like the Foscari tomb, the refuse of one style invading the birth of another. It's still one of those things, the refuse of Venetian Gothic invading the birth of Venetian Renaissance. Yes, that's me talking for too long, and nobody asked for it. Any more questions?
I guess for me, I'm just still mostly fascinated with the fact that really the stock exchange and the whole concept of modern banking really came out of Venice. You know, when you study history and you study so many things, and it's something I don't know why I always go back to it. I think I need to do a lot more research and learn more about it. But when you think of so many things that democratic society, you know, how they started their whole political society, everything that we base so many things on, I don't think I ever gave it credit to some of the sources. So
no, the amount of stuff that they just
more and more to them.
The amount of stuff that they invented is absolutely unparalleled. I don't think there's, except for maybe ancient Greece, there's no other city that contributes so much to where we are. But nobody knows that. Nobody has a clue that.
And the trade, like the opening up of, you know, getting the silk trade and how to open up Europe to all the trading and how they managed that and buying into the ships. It's just bizarre.
Even just the fact that they suggested the Suez Canal, 300 years before the Suez Canal was actually built. They're just way ahead of. If anybody wants to read a book on the financial aspect, there's a book called Money and Banking in Medieval Venice by Frederick C. Lane. He is one of the chief. It's not a mainstream history book. It's borderline academic with thick footnotes and things like that. But Frederick C. Lane is one of kind of 3 or 4 historians of Venice who, if you dive into Venice, you will come across him at some stage. The other ones are John Julius Norwich and the woman who had a sex change. Can you remember her name, Kathleen? I can't remember. I can never remember her name. She used to be a man, but now she's a woman. But she writes popular / borderline intellectual histories of Venice as well. But yeah, Frederick Lane, money in Renaissance and medieval Venice. If you're interested in the financial aspect, the one reason why there is so much history of Venice, even though it's such an old history, is because of the advanced nature of their record keeping. They have the Marciana Library, which has record. We have the contract that the Crusaders signed with the blind Doge Enrico Dandolo. That exists. That contract is in the archives. We know what Dandolo's signature looked like, and they've written biographies of Enrico Dandolo, trying to figure out why he was blind. And there are three stories, three hypotheses as to how he became blind. The most famous one is that in Constantinople there was an uprising against the Venetians, and he had his eyes poked out, and so he wanted to take revenge on the Byzantines, which hence the Fourth Crusade. It's almost certainly untrue because they've analysed his signatures on ducal pronouncements and on contracts, and it's perfectly legible. And then 10 years later, it's a little bit wonky, and then 10 years after that, it's just literally it's just a dribbling line. So they know what his signature looked like over a period of 30 years because their archives are so comprehensive. Their record keeping is unparalleled in the medieval world.
And they weren't destroyed.
And they haven't been destroyed because
Germany, France, England, so much was destroyed in the war too. In our modern times that we don't have it, but it was sort of protected. But I'm fascinated more now with the political contributions and I've been so deep in the art and the architecture that I kind of skipped over the whole real history of it.
Yeah. You do. You come here and you get kind of carried away with the art, but you don't realize the practicalities of living on water for 1,000 years forces you to become innovative. Muaz, you were going to say something?
Yeah. I just wanted to know, can you recommend a good introductory but in-depth kind of history book on Venice, not just focusing on money and banking, but in general?
The number one introductory book is A History of Venice by John Julius Norwich. It's about that thick. There you go. Katie has it. It's about that thick, and it's so strange because it covers the beginnings, the 5th century up until the 21st century, and it's almost there's what's that curve, the normality curve, of hang on, let me draw a diagram. That kind of curve. So it starts off, that's like the 5th century. Wait, where am I? Yeah, that's like they're page numbers, by the way. So that's the 5th century. And by the time you get to the 15th and 16th century, he's just spending thousands of pages on that middle era that the tour kind of focuses primarily on. John Julius Norwich, short answer. A History of Venice is the answer to that question. Muaz. Sorry, I got carried away with my diagrams. Whew. Yes, McKinley Barnes. Well, welcome back.
So I have just kind of a practical question for Josh and for Kathleen, because clearly you both have, Kathleen, you seem to be in Venice, and Josh, you've spent a lot of time in Venice. I lived in a part of the world that was affected by flood in this country, in the United States, and there were places that I couldn't go after that flood because of the smell. Mm-hmm. But these places weren't designed to be underwater.
Yeah.
And so I'm curious, in Venice, it's built upon water. It's designed to interact with water on a regular basis. So for that reason, last fall when they had these massive floods, when the water recedes, does everything go back to normal? I mean, it's just built for that? Just curious. Because I'd like to come again, but I can't handle. There were places I just couldn't go because of.
There's no smell.
Smells? No. Remember, you've got salt water first. First of all, there's a big difference between swamp water, New Orleans, and salt water, and decay. You're dealing with stone. You're dealing with tide. So even with that terrible, terrible combination of wind, rain, astronomical high tide, everything that happened, it's a perfect storm. It was a perfect storm. And yes, there was a lot of damage, but the Venetians are very used to dealing with this on a regular basis now. This was just beyond that. It was close to the 66 floods. And But once the water goes down, I was there 2 years before, maybe it was 3 years before, when they had the last big one. And we literally were out that afternoon going for a walk while everyone was cleaning up. It was beautiful. It was spectacular. So while this was unusual, and the water, because of the Scirocco, pushes the water up the Adriatic, that pushes the tide, and the wind kept coming and did not let the tide go back down, that you had this length of time and high wind and waves. I mean, there was boats flying and everything. It was a real catastrophe. But when the wet water goes down, everyone's out on the streets. They were floating around in their little refrigerators drinking spritz in front of their bars. I mean, they're a very different type of people. Yes, sadly, the damage, the infrastructure, museums, things were flooded, basements were flooded, archives, because this was worse than they had my friends' homes all have the preparation to go up about, what would you say, like 30 inches, Josh, in the doors?
Yeah.
It's about a 30-inch, these little barriers.
Yeah, they're big steel barriers in front of all the doors that are almost watertight.
They're like little water gates. And, usually Venetians, no one lives on the first floor anyway.
Yeah, first floors have almost all been abandoned.
It's storage, magazzino, they call it. And nowadays they're all Airbnbs.
Yeah, I'm in one.
Illegal. They're darling, and they all say pied à terre, which means ground floor, so don't think it means it's a cute apartment. Pied à terre. And it's never intended to be lived in. So, yes, there's all that extra damage. But I've been in there in the height of summer, and I mean really hot. And you get a little bit of a whiff of something, but
it just smells like seafood.
I was in New Orleans after Katrina.
Yeah.
Where there's decay, because you don't have plants. You don't have meadows and greenery and all that.
Rocks don't smell.
Like here, things are made with drywall, and drywall is meant to be dry. When drywall becomes wet, it needs to be completely knocked down, taken down to the studs, and then.
No, nothing's made of drywall. It's all made of bricks.
Stone. You've got stone that's designed. Now you do see salt bloom.
Yeah.
That's the damage because the water has gotten above where the Istrian base was designed to protect everything. So it's not going to. Venice isn't going to sink in our lifetime.
No, it's got
for the next maybe 10 generations, but
it's got 1,000 years
it's
left.
Gonna happen. Yeah.
What was I going to say? They're built. Venetian houses are almost all built out of what are called altinelle, which are a very unique form of Venetian brick. They're flatter and wider than normal bricks, and very easy to replace. And so you can see in any facade whose stucco has come off. You will have, like a triangle here where they've clearly put new bricks in. And you have, again, more discoloration, which just adds to the beauty of the whole city. Yes, Sarah?
I have a fact about cement.
You have a fact about cement?
A fun fact.
Yeah, what is it?
So, back in Rome or something, and I'm wondering if it was also in Venice, but there's a certain kind of cement and, bacteria that grows in it, and if it decays or gets cracked over time and gets exposed to oxygen and rain, then that bacteria can grow in and fill it in.
Oh yeah.
But I saw something about Venice and how Venice is kind of sinking in areas, and they were using bacteria to then just go into the areas that are getting cracked and create calcified structures or something.
Oh, that's fascinating. But if anybody would be on top of that, it would be the Venetians.
Oh, yeah.
Well, someone asked on the tour the other day, a question that fascinates me, is to bricolare, the poles that go into the ground to form the basis of everything, they calcify and they harden rather than softening and ruining. Who the hell figured that out? Because you have to leave one of those in there. No, you have to try it once and wait decades to find out that it calcifies. This process is a centuries-long process. Someone figured that out, and then either that or they just tried. Well, let's try it and see what happens. If we fuck it up, we fuck it up.
I always thought that they got that kind of from the petrified woods up in the further parts of the river valleys of Italy, where forests had come down and decayed and gotten embedded in lakes and things like that, and they discovered that they were petrified. Because a lot of those ancient settlements inland they're prehistoric, also built on on the water. So I'm wondering if they sort of brought that knowledge with them, because petrified wood exists everywhere.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And they knew that would happen.
Yeah.
It would happen.
It would.
It would happen.
Very good, very good.
I'm not dead yet.
Where are we?
Josh, you have to find it now.
I will. The bricular fascinates me. Well, the bricular fascinate me, plural. I will. I've got a bunch of stuff on here that I will get back to you on during the week. I still have 4.5 days here, so I will do all the research I can and fill in the gaps that the tour leaves a lot of gaps, I think, but there's only so much. There's only so long I can hold your attention for with the one city. Again, Venice with this guy. Any other questions about the tour, about Venice? Curiosities? Muaz, are you clearing your throat for a reason?
Josh, regarding Ruskin, do you have any specific, is there a specific essay that deals just with Venice, or it's the collection of essays?
Well, the big one is the Stones of Venice. That's where the name of the tour comes from. Over 3 years, he released the 3 volumes of the Stones of Venice. But it is extremely long and extremely filled with divergences, and he gets so, I don't know if anal retentive is the word, but he gets too meticulous with his measurings and his readings into one corner of one building and condemning entire civilizations because of a window. So you can find abridged versions of the Stones of Venice. I've never read one or dived into one.
Okay.
But I don't know, the history of Venice. I'll get back to you on that one.
William Howells, the old books by William Howells are very good too. Venetian Life.
And Horatio Brown is another one. Horatio C. Brown. These are amateur historians, late 19th century amateur historians, who relocated to Venice out of a love for the place, and just kind of, did the old British man things. Just looked into history on a surface level and became amateur historians. But Ruskin is
good. They're good. I think it's a good jumping off point. I know, with Howells, that he reads well, and the funny thing, it translates that when you read his pieces, nothing has changed. You just put different characters in the stories. It's really kind of fascinating how little has changed there, even with the modernization of society. It's a very Byzantine society.
Yeah. But yeah, Muez, I will get back to you on the one book to read from Ruskin on Venice. The one I would recommend is called St. Mark's Rest. But it was one of the last books that he wrote, and he'd already kind of 50-50 lost his mind. So it's a little bit out there with the conclusions that it draws. But yeah, it's called St. Mark's Rest.
Okay.
And it's very manageable and very readable. But you can't really trust the conclusions that he makes in it, because he's already talking to paintings in his spare time.
Regarding Casanova, you mentioned the Everyman's Library version, right? So I came across that's I think abridged. So John Hopkins published recently the 6-volume complete works of the story of my life, right? That's the one.
Histoire de ma vie.
So I just came across that. So I thought that might be interesting.
6 volumes.
Yes,
he's interesting, but he's not that interesting.
And it's funny if you arrange them in the way it's a painting across the spines of the
on
book,
the spines.
It's a nude painting. So
of course it is. He's a little pornographer.
Casanova.
Apparently writing is very detailed about the 18th century. I mean, you do cover it, and you say he's very. I mean, he's a good source of to understand the culture.
Because he travels all around Europe for 20, 30 years. So.
No, he's a good writer. I mean, it's not a hard read. It's actually a pleasure.
But it's never boring,
really
ever. I have a dinner reservation in half an hour, so I have to run. Thank you guys for coming to the Q&A and for bringing your questions hither. If you have any questions at all about Venice at any stage, just ask. I am here for your Venetian pleasure in a non-creepy way.
So jealous.
Take,
so jealous.
take the tour as many times as you want. Watch all the. It's there for you. It's there for you. The password stays the same. I think once you use the password, you don't need to use it again, unless you're using like a shady browser to pirate things in your spare time. But yes, thank you very much, guys, for the live Q&A. Very welcome. I'm going to post this video on YouTube because some people couldn't make the tutorial. So if you want to,
I want to know where you're going to dinner. You say Paradiso for dinner on the screen.
Oh well, I'll make you too jealous if I tell you where I'm going for dinner.
No.
It's everything's open. It's literally business as usual, except for a couple of museums. But there are no Chinese tourists to fill the gaps of business as usual. So it's just fantastic. Nice. It's great. Thank you very much, guys. I'm glad you enjoyed the tour. Those of you who enjoyed the tour, I'll speak to you again in the Instagram account. Bye bye. A live Q&A with your Venetian tour guide / gondolier / Bellini drinker, Joshua.
If I could fly like birds on high, then straight to her arms